Our first speaker is Patrice Albert. She is the Executive VP for HR and Inclusion at the NCAA, a title that she's had and a role that she's played since 2017. Katrice has been a lightning rod for the I'm going to keep saying Northeast Conference, for the NCAA and the Northeast Conference. Since she arrived at the NCAA, the amount of attention that has been paid toward diversity and inclusion has significantly increased. She has worked diligently with the Board of Directors at the Division I level, as well as the Board of Governors, to implement a number of initiatives from presidential pledge down to helping us work through some programming to advance coaches through the system. So at every level, she's made a difference. She is an inspiration to me. I have seen her speak on a number of occasions and had the opportunity to work directly with her in my role as a co-chair of the NCAA Gender Equity Task Force. And when I say she is a force, she is a force, and you will hear that today. So I'm very excited and thrilled and honored that Katrice has taken the time from her schedule, her very busy schedule, to be with us here today. And I know that you will be blown away by her presentation. So thank you, Katrice, and welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, and Noreen, thank you so much for the welcome and the introductory remarks. As we launch this inaugural Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit for the Northeast Conference, I know that we feel nothing but excitement and anticipation of the learning community that we're going to create today during this summit. But I do want to have us keep in mind the entire community of Jersey City and the 6 lives that were lost in this targeted anti-Semitic attack on Monday. I think that for us, we can be very conscious of the power of realizing that we're all in this together, and part of this is really about how do we figure out others' lived experiences and have empathy around it. Paul Peterson is a giant in the field of multicultural counseling, and he was at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, before he passed away, and he defined cultural competence as a focus on our awareness, our knowledge, our skills, our behaviors, and action. So I think in today's summit, that's what you should be thinking about, and really holding in your heart the fact that an anti-Semitic targeted ambush happened, and 6 lives were lost right at the holiday time in our midst. So what can we do as a learning community to really be conscientious of awareness, knowledge, skill building, our changed behaviors, and action? And so action really, on our campuses. So I'm so happy to be in your midst today, and so delighted that Commissioner Morris invited me this morning. You have a long haul champion in your commissioner, and she mentioned our working together as her leadership as a co-chair for the Gender Equity Task Force, and her leadership has been so important in getting a lot of the recommendations approved by the Board of Governors. And one of the recommendations that is most recent is the 1 in 5 year diversity, equity, and inclusion review that is going to be required for all Division I schools. So that is so important, and it's so vital, so that we are really keeping ourselves accountable of something that we say is very important, right? Inclusive excellence has to be a part of the very fabric of our institutions. And you know of her extensive service over time in the governance structure during her career, and especially on the Strategic Visioning and Planning Committee. She's a visionary, but she's action-oriented. So you'll hear me say that throughout my remarks this morning about we've got to have a call to action. It's more than just really wanting to do the right thing, right? The action, the commitment to action has to be a part of it. And so the dialogue that you're creating in this inaugural summit is action, right? The learning community that you're going to be committed to, and the willingness to be a part and take your day out. So I'm so proud of the Northeast Conference for taking this on and being committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, we do it for a reason. And I think that what I'm supposed to just click at the. So I might need some technical help here. Here we go. Thank you. Sometimes you just have to get people to say, please slide, just advance. So we do this for a special reason, because it's 500,000 of our greatest assets that we work with to give them access and opportunity for academic excellence so that they can compete in a fair way, but then they also have health and wellness. And so Noreen did give an introduction, but I'm a higher education wonk. So I spent 15 years in my home state doing this very work at LSU, and then 5 years at the University of Minnesota system doing it for the, doing this work for an entire system. So I went from a subtropic culture to the bold north. So talk about understanding somebody's lived experience. And so, our 500,000 greatest assets, our student athletes are why we do what we do. And I'm standing on very broad shoulders. So Dr. Bernard Franklin, many of you may have known that he did this work at the NCAA prior to President Emmerich combining this role to include human resources. So it is much like, the role is much like the role in Fortune 500 companies. So he had the great, intrigue to be able to mimic this so that inclusion was at the apex of talent management. And so over the time that I've taken on the role, we've done a lot of listening and a lot of touring. And this is the strategic initiatives where you might be able to see yourselves that we want to perpetuate inclusive excellence in our association, where inclusion is in the very fabric of what we do. Many of you have been to the Inclusion Forum. If you haven't, please join us in Denver in mid-April, where we are able to have, much more robust conversations around the academic side of the house and the scholarship, but also the action and the advocacy. We want to build and engage a high-performing organization. So as Noreen mentioned, we're situated in Indianapolis. It's 520 of us at the national office, but as an association, you have an ethos of care, right? So you're very busy working for the association and the 1,100 colleges and universities that you all represent, but we don't ever fill the well. So it's part and parcel to how do we do a comprehensive talent management strategy so that we're giving you the level best, and that we are making sure that we have, a high-performing organization that's giving you what you need. We want to drive operational excellence. Inclusion and diversity work is not just kumbaya work, right? There should be metrics associated with the things that we say we want to do. We have to demonstrate return on investment because it's your money. It's the association's money. So we just can't dump money into things that we think might work. We've got to say, we're going to build a plan here. We're going to operationalize this plan, put metrics by it, and then have some operations around the fact that we've got to say, okay, there is a return on investment. These initiatives really worked. These need to be tweaked, and we need to sunset. We also know that there is lots of discussion in the association where we have a continuation on the Commission on College Basketball and Name, Image, and Likeness. So there's a lot of resources, right, being put towards those initiatives. So I've got to make good on the monies that I already have because there are no new monies coming in to help do this work. So operational excellence is also sort of like my grandmother used to say, you gotta make a way out of no way, because no new money is coming, but we still have this great work to do. We also want to future-proof the industry. What do I mean by this? We want our student athletes to see themselves reflected in those who coach, teach, and lead them. So part of future-proofing the industry is making sure that our student athletes see themselves, coming into the career of intercollegiate athletics. I'll use myself as an intervention. When I was at LSU, I was really connected to the women's basketball team. So I was their academic faculty member sponsor of choice. I mentored, I cajoled, I listened to a lot of the heartaches and pains of missing home and, having to, be a student athlete and compete at the highest level. But I also did career coaching, and most of the students were in other disciplines other than sports administration. I will tell you, I did not do a good job of saying, have you ever thought about being a coach? Have you ever thought about being an athletics director? So we've got to try to figure out ways to encourage our students to stay close to the game by staying in the industry. I also need great people in the pipeline so that when I talk with hiring authorities, they're unable to tell me. There's no top diverse talent out there, Katrice. So I need to future-proof the industry so that mythology sort of goes away, and we are able to really make sure our student athletes have professionals who are reflected. And so part of that is your work too, right? So you want to be able to encourage student athletes to, see themselves in the industry, but we also want you to have career succession planning through the industry to the top seat. We want to do external liberated engagement. And what do I mean by that? Liberated external engagement is that the NCAA puts on championships. We do 90 championships. We often are in communities where the NCAA doesn't have a good perception, right? So the blue disc doesn't mean everything. It doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. We're often going into communities of need because that's where stadiums and arenas are situated. We go in for 48 and 72 hours and then we're out instead of making impact. And so we want to use our institutions, our member schools, especially our HBCUs and our limited resource institutions as social anchors to be able to do great external engagement. And finally, we want to become a national voice in the work because you all are doing great work. Being able to promote our student athletes and the things that they are doing is a national voice. We're able to also pilot things in departments of athletics because you're much more nimble. So I don't want you to think that during this time where you're going to be a learning community that you can't do some of the things that some of your colleagues are doing. Test it out. Pressure test it quickly, fail fast, and then try again. So we want to be able to have a national voice in this work by doing great partnerships like with the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education. We need to get athletics connected to some of these national organizations that we have not been historically connected to. So I hope in these strategic priorities you can see yourselves situated in them, and if not, we need to be able to chat because part of the ways in which we get these accomplished is through our member schools. So Noreen talked about our association-wide commitment, and our Committee to Promote Cultural Diversity and Equity is an association-wide committee that started out as an ad hoc committee. And they have three major goals. And I think you would see yourselves reflected here as well, which is to align our governance structure to include inclusive excellence. So those people who are making the decisions are also having a representation and reflection. They want to have operational excellence as well, to maximize and utilize metrics to galvanize accountability and keep people on track with diversifying athletics leadership. And we want to operationalize the pledge. So this pledge was signed in 2017, and the pledge has two main goals: to have institutions and member schools sign on to say that they will have a covenant with student athletes around a reflection and initiative on diversity and inclusion efforts, particularly around hiring and making sure that even though presidential turnover might happen, what we want to do is be able to demonstrate that there is a commitment from the member school. And so once a president has signed on, the next president is able to just replace their name on the pledge. As of December 2019, about 80% of all NCAA member schools have signed this pledge around a commitment to inclusion. Right now, we are at about 82% in Division I and about 82% in the Northeast Conference. So we're really proud of the Northeast Conference for taking the responsibility of signing the pledge. Signing the pledge is a covenant, and it's sort of like this utopia. Yes, that we will do this, but we're now at the point of the pledge where we've got to have a call to action, and the Committee to Promote Cultural Diversity is really committed to making sure that we are galvanizing metrics, and having things like this summit is a way to be able to talk about that. So what I might do is just try to go to using the actual computer. Noreen, there we go. So I mentioned these 3 goals for you and the presidential pledge, but I want to talk to you now about your own metrics, okay? And so this is really important because as I travel the country, going to conferences, part of what we're doing around operational excellence is showing the metrics and showing how we have to be very dedicated with our commitment to inclusive excellence. So what you'll see is over the past 5 years, the Northeast Conference student athlete population became more diverse. 41% of the conference's student athletes today are non-white as compared to 37.6% in 2015. So trends show nationally that student athletes will continue to become more diverse, and we've got to prioritize hiring people who are representative of those that they can see themselves reflected. We also have done the demographics related to ADs, and so across the country nationally, there's 91% of the conference's ADs are white and 2/3 of those are males. There's been a very significant increase, and I think a commitment to gender equity here, and I think that might have a little bit to do with our fearless leader being a part of the Gender Equity Task Force and being very thoughtful around gender inclusion. And so 27.3% in 2019 as compared to 8.3% just 5 years ago. So here's the thing, there's 0 black men and women and 0 men of other minorities. And so Commissioner Morris has acknowledged to me many, many times that the conference is really committed to issues of race ethnicity. And I think when we talk about the leadership lessons, you'll be able to understand why it's so important to be in summits like this, to have those really hard conversations about what the data tell us. The associate ADs and assistant ADs, I think, is where we can have the most significant impact and we can make the headways around building the pipeline. White women have increased about 10% since 2015, but again, there's a vast disparity around women of color, where there's only 2% black women as associate or assistant ADs. And like 5 years ago, and what is known across our industry is that white men still hold more than half of all assistant and associate AD jobs. And how do you get to the top seat, right? How do you get to the top seat but succession plan through being able to have some of these roles? Head coaches, not anything that you already don't know. So you see where we're going here, right? With these bars, and I don't want your eyeballs to come out of your head, but part of operational excellence is being able to sit with data that reflect these trends. So as true nationally, white men dominate in head coaching positions of men's teams in the Northeast Conference, while women have made very little inroads in coaching men's teams. Here's an issue related to pipelining. When we get to assistant coaches of men's teams, there's positive news related to an increase in terms of ethnic minority men up about 4%, black men up about 6%, and black women up about 4.5%. But again, the tailwinds around the ways in which you are able to diversify the coaching ranks and future-proof the industry is we've got to get them in the pipeline. So where we might be able to have the most favor is to be able to, get coaches of color, women coaches in as assistant coaches, but that is bold hiring practices, right? And we'll talk just a little bit about that. Okay, data, sort of the same for women's teams. In your conference, there's a slight increase for women of color, around 2.8%. White women up about 3.3% in comparison to 5 years ago. But again, vast disparities around black and white women, especially in these head coaching ranks. And same goes for assistant coaches of women's teams. There have been increases in men of color, but the sharp decrease right here is a decrease over time, over the 10 years of white women from 45% down to 39%. So that's also interesting. Why is there a stop out of coaches that had historically, been rising through the ranks? So we show these slides, and I'll also show, this slide as well, that if I could have it just make it a little bit bigger for you to be able to see. This is suggesting that these are the best coaches in the world to come and learn from. The best coaches in the world to come and learn from. So it's reflective of our industry, right? So what I want to also say to you is, this was a girl just trying to figure out how to get a PhD in counseling psychology. So you saw all of those data slides with the high bar, that one high bar. This was just a girl trying to figure out a way to get a PhD in the industry. I have to have blazingly articulated courage to bring us closer to our highest ideals, because I have to say these hard things. And the work can be lonely sometimes. I'm sure Noreen might commiserate with some of y'all that although she talked about just how fabulous I am, I don't always say things that, that bring me friends, right? I have to say things that are unpopular. And in the current work, it's about the 500,000 student athletes, 40% of whom across the NCAA are racially and ethnically diverse, 30% of whom are women. However, 65% of all ADs across the NCAA are white men. 85% of all head coaches across the NCAA are white men. And 70% of all conference commissioners in the NCAA are white men. So why do I say this? And why do I have to say it out loud? Well, it's because I have to help these leaders understand their role in hiring diversity so that our student athletes can see themselves reflected in those that coach, teach, and lead them. I have to have these meaningful conversations in compassionate ways that I have to help them push past all of their competing interests in terms of the ways in which they do this. But I would be remiss if I did not say out loud that white men kicked open doors to rooms where I rightfully belonged. This photograph shows you that I would not be standing on this stage but for white men who figured out how to be champions for others who were not their mirror images. So it's not lost on me that our industry has a long way to go, but our champions have to be those folks in the high bars, right? It's our responsibility to figure out initiatives and to lead from our sphere of influence and to figure out ways to influence our hiring authorities who have those responsibilities to hire top talent. But I also want you to know there's complexity here. I want to move our industry to our highest ideals, but I also want to say our champions have to understand their role too. So part of the work is being able to demonstrate to those hiring authorities that we have quality people that can come and take these roles, and they just don't have to call their 4 other friends in the industry to say, who do you have, right? So our leadership development is on purpose trying to build, launch, and advance careers, We have over 30 programs at the NCAA that you might have already been a part of, that you encourage your colleagues to become a part of, so that we do the pipelining and I don't have to hear the mythology that there's just no top talent out there. And what we figured out is that it's really easy. It's two pathways. We need to encourage people to consider intercollegiate athletics through the coaching ranks, and we need to have people consider leadership in the athletics administration ranks. So what you have in your folders, I want to show you, is what I use with your presidents and all presidents in the NCAA. I make it easy for them to tell them that there are recommendations that we have for bold, courageous leadership. And you can find yourselves on this sheet, because what I'm saying is you need to deploy other senior leaders like yourselves to help in this undertaking. You make the work easier when others are involved. When you can lead from your sphere of influence and help them lead from their sphere of influence to have bold and courageous leadership. Let me give you one example. E. Joe Savoy is president at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, but was on the search committee for the new commissioner of the Sun Belt Conference. And so being a Louisiana girl, I said, okay, here's my opportunity to call all these presidents that I know from my time at LSU in higher education, and made the call to say, I've already talked to your conference. You have my recommendations around bold, courageous leadership for, your next Sun Belt Conference commissioner. I'm not telling you who to hire. But what I'm saying is you need bold and courageous leadership in considering all of the candidates. And please know that I know that there's diversity in the pool. Okay, so you're saying, well, Patrice Albert, you're the EVP, you can say that. But part of us becoming a learning community is trying to help you find the words to be able to say that of those in power in ways that are compassionate and in ways that are loyal, but also saying, you have said this, you've said it to us in meetings. It is important that, inclusive excellence is a part of what we do. I think that at this next hire, we need to really think strategically about diversity in leadership. It's almost like Dr. Phil's script of the month, right? You've got to be able to figure out ways to have these conversations, sometimes hard, with those who are in leadership and hiring authority. Part of your role here today is to also just get comfortable with your own leadership in this area. And as I said on the front end, these conversations can be hard, but they have to be had because they're vital and necessary for you all to get to where you want to get to in your own strategic planning around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I just have 4 leadership lessons that I want to talk to you about today. So Brandon Jones is my life partner. I've known this man since I was 13 years old. We broke up right after college, and he got married to another woman. And I said, who does that? Who breaks up and marries somebody else? So we didn't talk to each other for 12 years. It was 12 years of silence. All right, so this is our encore performance. And so he is what I consider the epitome of a black male feminist, meaning that he has been my co-pilot so that I might have personal and professional succession planning, and he's been a support system throughout the way. But when I got the role at the NCAA, he knew that he had to help me step up my game. Because I'm good at diversity work. And so but he is a sports information wonk. Okay? So this man has forgotten more sports information than we all know collectively. I am so very serious. So he can't remember that Valentine's Day comes every February 14th. And he can't remember our anniversary because we have 2 of them. But he knows all of this sports information. So every morning before I leave the house, he gives me the top 4, right? Because as a psychologist, I'm always talking, the ways in which we are able to cognitively and intellectually learn things. And he knows that your brain remembers 5 plus or -2. So he gives me 4 top sports data points every morning because, you know, he's up with the D1 ticker and all of this other stuff. And he's like, here's the thing, you can't go into these meetings every morning and not know what your colleagues are talking about. I know that what you're supposed to be doing is inclusive excellence in the industry, but you've got to be able to align this, you know, with the actual sports world. So he comes and he does it in a very elegant way. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. You know, it's almost like don't shoot the messenger. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but here are the top 4 things that you need to know. And so part of the conversation that I want to have with you is your top 4. So I'm almost like him, right? I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I just think that these are 4 top leadership lessons that I think, you know, as you launch your inaugural Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit today, you will be able to make yourselves more open to others. If you are able to sort of think about and process these leadership lessons. And I encourage you to just aim higher, right? You came here for a reason. You're giving your entire day. I want you to aim higher because you know what they say, yesterday's home runs won't win today's games, right? And so in your own cultural competence journey, I want you to first of all rumble with vulnerability. So Brené Brown, our famed sociologist, in her latest book, Dare to Lead, she says you've got to arrive early and you got to stay late. Well, we know that because we're in intercollegiate athletics. That's what we do. But you got to get your hands dirty. So you've got to get in here. And during this process of creating inclusion, it's got to be really a self-reflective experience, right? What I always say, the longest 12 inches is between the head and the heart. So we've got to connect this cognitive, intellectual way of being that we want to do the right thing with a self-reflection of, I don't know it all, and that's okay, right? But I have to be able to be empathetic enough to know somebody else's lived experience and have these courageous conversations. Vulnerability means humility. We don't know everything. We don't know everybody's lived experiences, but when we hear it and it sometimes falls hard on our ears, it's okay to just go to a place where I've got to be much more empathetic. And when people are willing to share with you, you've got to be able to understand that. I would go back to those the other slide of the picture with me with my 3 mentors, but I'm scared about the technology. I would tell these men all kinds of things that they had never experienced before of what it was to be a Black woman in Auburn, Alabama, trying to go into practicum sites where I was always taken for someone else other than the psychologist in training. Something they'd never experienced. But we had to have these sort of cross-cultural experiences that were not always easy for them to grow me into the psychologist that you're looking at today. So part of it is rumbling with vulnerability. I think for some of you in the audience today, attending this summit might be your rumbling with vulnerability. Extend yourself a little bit. So when you're in these, you know, experiences with the panels and they're doing tabletop experiences, get in there. Lean into what might be most fearful. Talk about the critical issues that are going on your campuses, because somebody might hold the keys to an example that they have used that actually that's worked. So sometimes you're leading this conversation because you have more insight. Sometimes you're just being an active listener because you just don't understand what it means to be a Black woman in Auburn, Alabama, trying to get a PhD in counseling, right? So you've got to be able to figure out your way. Sometimes everybody is all on the same page and y'all are hitting on all cylinders, and then you can go to action planning. But that's like down the road, so don't try to rush through the vulnerability. You've got to be an active listener, and you got to be realistic with your expectations. Sometimes these aren't glamorous moments, right? It's hard. Cross-cultural, critical conversations have to happen so that real change can happen in our communities. You got to aim higher during your summit and during your inclusive excellence journey, because yesterday's home runs won't win today's games. I encourage you to create paths of opportunity by being a waymaker. And what do I mean by waymaker? I mean those folks who have influence, and you have influence, right? You've got to create opportunities for others, especially those who are not your mirror images. You've got to be willing to open doors and kick glass for other people to be able to have access, but especially for those who have been left out and left behind in our grand enterprise of higher education, but more specifically in our enterprise around intercollegiate athletics. And that's, I'm gonna name them, that's people of color, that's women, that's veterans, LGBTQA+, those from lower SES who just didn't have the access to higher ed, first generation folks who still need, right, the passport of how do I do this? So from your sphere of influence, it's just not the folks who have hiring authority, because you have influence on them. I'm on flights a lot of days, as Noreen told you, 2 years in, and I'm going to conferences and to our member schools. And one of the favorite documentaries that I've watched on many a Delta flight over and over again is the documentary on the notorious RGB. Right, so Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which her producers call that documentary a love story. And you know, she is of course recognized as having used the law to change the world for better. And she ended up being one of 9 women in the first class that accepted women into Harvard Law, where at the inaugural dinner for the new incoming L1s, the dean of the law school asked her to explain to him why she was taking a seat away from a man. Okay, so this is our history, folks. So when she graduated top of her class, no law firm in New York City would hire her. Why? You already know the reason. So her male colleagues who had gotten these roles were very interested in using their sphere of influence as junior attorneys, only on the job a couple of weeks, by saying, look, I know you think that I'm crazy by saying this, but one of our classmates hadn't been placed yet. And when he used the pronoun she, the managing attorney said, well, no wonder why she hasn't been placed. But that didn't matter, because he was using his sphere of influence as a junior attorney to say the top graduate of our class deserves an opportunity to work in this top law firm. She has given many an opportunity throughout her career by being a waymaker, by making sure that women and people of color have access, to clerk for her. And she's often invoked the women's suffragist Sarah Gimsky's comments about, I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask is that all I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off of our necks. So what I'm saying to you is, be a waymaker from your sphere of influence. How do you have the opportunity to open doors for folks who might not otherwise have that opportunity? How do you kick glass for others, especially those who might not be your mirror images? I'm working directly with your presidents, but you should be working directly with people that you know you are able to influence. You've got to lead and make impact now, because that's how you succession plan, and that's how you keep diversity, equity, and inclusion at the very core of your work. I encourage you to aim higher, because as we know, yesterday's home runs won't win today's game. So in this DE&I journey, you've got to aim higher. You've got to be a waymaker. You got to be like those 3 guys on that picture with that young woman who just wanted to get a PhD in counseling. I think you have to cultivate a radically clear anti-racist lens. Now, I don't want your ears to start bleeding when I say this, but our work continues, and our work has to continue in an anti-supremacist way. And our country has made us think that somehow we have supremacy over other people just by the fact of the privilege that we have. No matter what seat you're in, there's privilege. And so part of the ways in which we have to do some of this work is undoing some of the things that we believe in order to have different behaviors and actions. You've got to undo racism. You've got to undo sexism. You've got to undo homophobia. You've got to undo transphobia. You've got to undo Islamophobia. You have to do that work. Cultural competence is self-reflection. It is the head and the heart coming together. You've got to be willing to invite people to the table, and that's only a part of it. But the fundamental shift happens when we're much more proximate and we learn from each other. So we were at the University of Texas at Austin last month for our Common Ground initiative. And many of you know that Common Ground is now in its 5th year. It's a gathering where we have these intense discussions around LGBTQ issues and faith-based values. Oftentimes very opposing, issues. And Common Ground seeks to cultivate greater understanding, greater awareness, greater skills, and knowledge around these polarizing issues. And it's very emotionally draining for the participants. But when we see common ground, we are saying we're willing to shift. And that's what I'm asking for you today, right? That you're willing to shift when you are engaged with someone whose lived experience is very different from yours, and you just don't understand. If you take nothing else that I say away from today, let me say the name Bryan Stevenson to you. Bryan Stevenson is the author of Just Mercy, and he's the founder of the Equity Justice Institute. And what he says in Just Mercy is we've got to become more proximate with one another. We just got to get closer to one another so that we're able to learn. We are much more brave, and we're much more courageous, and we're much more willing to unearth our implicit and explicit biases when we're much more connected to one another. And we truly understand that microaggressions happen, right? And oftentimes they're not intentional. It's just from the ways in which we have grown. It's just the ways in which our communities have cultivated us. And microaggressions happen. But William Smith from the University of Utah says that because of that, people who are more marginalized have battle fatigue because they are being microaggressed all day long. They have battle fatigue. So you have to be willing to hear that. You have to be willing to hear from your colleagues what it's like to be the only one. Because guess what? Some of our student athletes are experiencing that very same thing. So Bryan Stevenson is spectacular. Founder of the Equity Justice Institute, author of Just Mercy. I do believe that there is a movie coming out very soon from this book. I'd encourage you to watch his TED Talk with, either his TED Talk or the YouTube interview that he did with Oprah right before he opened up the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, which is formerly known as the Lynching Museum. Our country has a very dark history that until we are able to be more proximate with one another and really have an anti-racist, anti-supremacist lens, we'll never get this work done. So I ask you to aim higher, to think about where you're coming from a privileged vantage point, and then think about all the undoing that actually has to happen, because yesterday's home runs won't win today's games. And then finally, I want to encourage you to embrace longevity. And why do I want to encourage you to do that? Exclusion didn't start yesterday, so diversity, equity, and inclusion won't be solved tomorrow. Exclusion didn't start yesterday, inclusion won't happen tomorrow. This is long haul work. I have a pretty amazing job. I think this is the apex of my passion and my purpose coming together. I get to create access and opportunity, especially for those who would not otherwise have it. And I don't live my life in regret. But if I did, I would regret, and I do have job envy, of Lonnie Bunch, who was the founding director of the Smithsonian's Museum of African American History and Culture. He just was appointed the 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian, becoming the first African American man in the 174-year history of the Smithsonian. But if I had, I do have career envy. I would want to be running the Smithsonian's Museum of African American Art and Culture. And don't tell that to Mark Emmert, because I do love my job. And it is the apex of purpose and passion, but I do have job envy. At the dedication of the Smithsonian's Museum, it was a spectacular event. And Lonnie Bunch said, he put it in context of the historic moment, that the key here today is that there is no future without a good knowledge of the past. So let me talk to you about embracing longevity. Congressman John Lewis introduced legislation 15 consecutive times to get this museum built. Let me say that again. John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, introduced legislation to get this museum built 15 consecutive times. It wasn't until 2003 when President George W. Bush signed that legislation. And then it took 9 years to raise the money. So in 2012, the groundbreaking happened. And then just 3 years ago, in 2016, the ribbon cutting and the grand opening happened. This work of diversity, inclusion, and equity is slow. It's methodical, and it's long-term. You don't get a whole lot of wins, so it's hard. So you've got to celebrate the small little gems. Some of you have dedicated your entire careers to intercollegiate athletics, and you may have thought about these issues related to diversity, inclusion in intercollegiate athletics, because we want to promote excellence and access for all students, so that students feel like they belong on their campuses. We gotta delight in the incremental success around inclusive excellence, but we've got to demand a faster pace and rate. But you gotta embrace longevity. I would not have told you this story of John Lewis, 15 consecutive years, 2003, President Bush signing the legislation into existence, 9 years of raising the money, 3 years to get it built, and just 3 years ago, the groundbreaking, the ribbon cutting. You've got to embrace longevity in this long haul work. Part of it is doing what some of the strategic planning goals are about. You got to create the vision, right, related to the data. And that's often hard when you see those bars spiking up. You have to do that. You've got to be able to connect, your goals to the data. You've got to conspire with key decision makers. So those on your campus that you know are champions, you got to align with those champions so they help you carry the water. You got to celebrate those little victories, because they come very few and far in between. But you got to celebrate, because people want to be with winners. And then, here's the thing. You got to be able to course correct when things fail. You don't say, oh, well, this just didn't work. You got to figure out how to quickly course correct. And then you got to repeat that cycle, right? Get you some more goals. Look at the data, so the data tell you what you really need to be working on. Implement, test it out, course correct, celebrate, and then repeat it. And have that be top of mind. We too must be in this for the long haul, because you're a part of supporting these 500,000 greatest assets that we have. And as Congressman Lewis says, if you believe in something that you want to do, you've got to stand up for it, you got to fight, you got to push, you got to pull. So it's got to be in every direction. So I want you to aim higher today. So as you contemplate your presence here, I want you to be like I have to do in the morning when Brandon Jones comes to give me my top 4. You got to know that, number one, that there's infinite hope in the work that we're doing here, right? Our student athletes are our hope. And even in the face of grand challenges that I've been doing this work for more than 25 years, I keep coming because I'm very hopeful that we can make some impact. So keep close to you today your 4 leadership lessons around rumbling with vulnerability, creating a pathway to opportunity by being a waymaker, cultivating a radical anti-racist lens, and embracing longevity. And for this, I'm very thankful to you for being such a gentle audience, especially from the NCAA, being able to look at your own data, hearing the leadership lessons that I hope that you will use throughout your summit. So I really thank you for all of the hard work that you do in the Northeast Conference, that labor seen and unseen, known and unknown. For you, I want to aim higher, and I want to do better work. So I appreciate you, and I have about a little over 10 minutes to take any Q&A that you might have. So good morning.
So I encourage you, if you have any questions, now is a great time to pose them. There are no questions that are not appropriate at this point in time. So while we have Katrice, does anyone have any questions? Anyone here?
What would you say was your hardest experience about giving the message of diversity and inclusion as far as making people understand the importance and value of it?
Yeah, so this has been my career path. I think, I'll say this, I think that I started doing this work in the 6th grade. And so you said, well, how would you think that? So in the 6th grade, going to Catholic schools, we just did not, well, over the time I realized we had never celebrated MLK's birthday. And so I said, okay, so how am I going to ask this principal about what are we doing? So I went to the office and I sort of feigned ignorance. And I said, I don't know, maybe I missed the announcement. But I mean, so what are we doing to celebrate Dr. King's birthday? I mean, he's a global peace leader. And so his eyes were wide and he's like, oh my goodness, Katrice, we'll celebrate his birthday any way that you want to. And I said, well, what about a budget, right? 6th grade. So this is initiative, right? It's initiative. And so he's like, well, the sky's the limit. Just tell me what you want to do and we'll see about finding the money. So I was doing organizational change in my middle school, right? I think that it's about finding the courage to be able to say the words. Finding the courage to say the words. The words are okay. Right? But it's also a tone and a tenor. So, over my maturation of racial identity development, I spiked a little bit. I mean, I went to the Million Woman March. I kind of got, myself amped up and, did advocacy work in a way that was much more activism than advocacy. So, but, here's the deal. I learned early that people can hear you when you're saying hard words around the tone and the tenor. So my presidents don't want to see these slides, right? Your presidents don't want to see these slides. And when I'm in conference meetings like this, it's 11 presidents, and I rank order them. So they're all waiting on the next slide. Am I number 11? Because, there's healthy competition, just like in athletics, our presidents didn't get to be presidents without having this healthy competition. I think the hardest part is for all of us, sort of practicing the words and then doing it in such a way where people can hear you. These conversations aren't easy. Sometimes they seem repetitive. I'm like, didn't I just tell him this? I think to myself, on the way home, I've said this to President X, but I do think that it's just practice, and I've just gotten better over time. So part of the journey, right, around diversity, equity, and inclusion is being able to say the words. To be able to have a conversation about race, or to have a conversation about race, ethnicity, and LGBT, plus, faith-based initiatives. How are we able to say these words, especially in the national landscape where we seem to be screaming at one another? So I think, I think just over time, the hardest part has just been, how am I able to sort of get folks to understand that there's value and that it's not an accusatory experience. That picture of me with my 3 colleagues are there, it's there on purpose after the slides of all, the majority of our industry is led by white men, right? The softer part of it is, and they have to be champions for us. I wouldn't be standing here without those white men in counseling psychology who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So I think it's figuring out, I just got to keep practicing these words and then doing it in a way that it doesn't fall hard on people's ears. Other questions? That was very good.
Even though we're all unique institutions,
Yes.
if we were to try to formalize, you've done a lot of really good things with leadership of the, SAC, and you've done all these pieces, bits and pieces here and there. What might be some common outcomes that one might look at as you're trying to actually put this in writing and formalize that process?
Yeah, so I think that the diversity, equity, and inclusion review will help in that question around more formalization of the ways in which we're doing this work. Yes, every campus is unique. You struggle with different types of inclusive excellence issues. It's really about creating cultures of belonging, right? And so one campus's way of doing it might resonate with you. I think it's also how we do programming that demonstrates that inclusion is a part of the core fabric. So you don't necessarily think about, wow, the last 17 commencement speakers have all looked the same. Wow, the last 25 commencement speakers have all looked the same, right? So where can we start demonstrating representation in various ways, right? Where all of our students, but particularly our student athletes, are able to see themselves reflected. How are you able to partner with, your multicultural affairs or your diversity office because someone else in the Northeast Conference has done this and there's programming, around, particular experiences? Are you all reading one book? People do the big read where the entire campus reads one book. Can that book sort of be focused in on this issue, like maybe picking Just Mercy? So I think that there are ways that you can learn today, right, of things that are working. And the formalization of it will, I think, come in the review. Every campus is different, and I think the way in which we're marching down this path with presidents is a slow and methodical one. The minute that you try to force, a particular leader into a box, that's when they recoil. So I wouldn't suggest that we have some formalization of any type of DE&I strategy, but there are opportunities. For example, maybe the Northeast Conference creates a mentoring program where it's all formalized, where the 11 campuses are doing something very similar. But I would not suggest a total DE&I, program in the conference where you are all doing the exact same thing. I don't think that would be, the best use of the time to get you to where you need to be.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your comments.
Yeah.
One more question?
It was very similar.
Yeah.
And I think I was just saying, for those who are all attracted to this topic and
Yes.
this packet, how would one be able to just break the mold and do a first step? So
Mhm.
it was similar to it.
Yeah, and I think that what you do is you look at other models, either in the conference or from across the country. The NCAA pairs up with the Minority Opportunities Athletics Association, or MOA, every year at convention to give our Diversity Impact Award. And that's a campus that's really driving diversity, equity, and inclusion in their Department of Athletics, and they have to demonstrate impact on the programming. I'd encourage you to look at some of those past winners, some of those past recipients and how they got started. And so it's really about the influence, right? Getting with champions to say, you know, the University of Oregon had Bold Oregon, and that was their diversity initiative. And it just took, you know, a few members of, you know, the Department of Athletics staff to, you know, connect with some of their SAC leadership so that the students led the way. But again, it is trying to not reinvent the wheel, but see options that are out there that have had success, and then to just tweak it for your campus community. There are lots of initiatives that are going on in our association where our students are having greater experiences and having, you know, much more senses of belonging. And so I think that those are the initiatives that you might want to consider, you know, mimicking and seeing whether or not the leadership, you know, or the powers that be who claim that, you know, diversity and inclusion have to be a part of the very fabric of what you do. Well, now here's the call to action. Here's a model that we might be able to use. So I really appreciate you. Good luck with everything today. Aim higher, because of course, you know, yesterday's home runs don't win today's game. So good luck with everything. Best wishes and good morning.